It happened in the summer of 2021 when I was driving through a remote stretch of highway in Arizona. I had been on the road for hours, the kind of monotonous drive where the landscape barely changes and time starts to feel like it's stretching. It was late, well past midnight, when my gas light came on. There wasn't much around, just endless desert and the occasional abandoned-looking roadside building. My GPS wasn't much help either, claiming the nearest gas station was nearly 50 miles away. That's when I saw the sign. A faded, flickering neon sign up ahead, glowing weakly in the darkness. Gas. Open 24 hours. It looked old, outdated. The kind of place that probably hadn't been renovated since the 80s. But I didn't have much choice. If I didn't stop, I wasn't sure I'd make it to the next station. I pulled in, gravel crunching under my tires. The place looked deserted. A single dim light flickered over the pumps, casting long, distorted shadows. The station itself was a small building with a convenience store, but through the grimy windows I couldn't see anyone inside. I stepped out of my car, the heat pressing against me, even in the dead of night. The air felt off, too still, too quiet. I glanced around, feeling uneasy, but forced myself to shake it off. I grabbed the pump, swiped my card, and started filling up. Then I noticed the door. The convenience store door was slightly open. Just barely. A gap wide enough to see inside, but too dark to make out much detail. I didn't remember seeing it open when I pulled in. I told myself the clerk was probably in the back, maybe restocking. But something about the way that door stood there, unmoving, sent a chill down my spine. I turned my attention back to the pump, watching the numbers climb. That's when I heard it. A low whisper. Not from the store. Not from behind me. From the pump. I felt my entire body lock up. It was faint. So faint I almost convinced myself I imagined it. But as I leaned in, straining to hear, the whisper grew louder. My name. I froze. My name, spoken softly, almost playfully. I whipped around, my eyes darting across the empty lot. Nothing. Just my car, the store, and the endless stretch of road beyond. My heart was pounding now, but I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was exhaustion messing with my head. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something move inside the store. A shape. Tall, standing just beyond the glass. It was impossible to make out any details in the darkness, but I could feel it watching me. The hairs on my arms stood up, and every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car. I didn't. I don't know why. Curiosity, stupidity, maybe both. But I took a slow step toward the store. My breath hitched as I reached the door and pushed it open just enough to peer inside. The interior was wrong. It wasn't abandoned, but it wasn't normal either. The shelves were stocked, but the products looked ancient, covered in a layer of dust. The air smelled stale, decayed, like it had been sitting untouched for decades. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered erratically, barely pushing back the darkness that seemed too thick for such a small space. Then I saw the clerk, or at least what should have been the clerk. A man stood behind the counter wearing an old, grease-stained uniform. His face was blank, expressionless, his eyes too dark, too empty. He wasn't blinking. He wasn't breathing. He just stood there. Then, in the silence, he smiled. The motion was slow, unnatural, stretching too far, revealing too many teeth. I stumbled back, my pulse slamming in my ears. I turned to bolt, but the door was closed. I hadn't touched it. I lunged for the handle, but the moment my fingers brushed the metal, I heard it again. That same whisper. This time, right at my ear. Run. I didn't need to be told twice. I yanked the door open and sprinted to my car, slamming the door shut and locking it. My hands were shaking so badly I barely got the keys into the ignition. As soon as the engine roared to life, I threw the car into reverse, my tires kicking up dust as I peeled out of the lot. In the rear-view mirror, I saw the clerk step out onto the porch, just standing there, watching, his head tilted slightly, his grin still plastered across his face. And then, just as I turned onto the highway, the lights of the gas station blinked out. I drove straight through the night, not stopping until I reached a well-lit, busy truck stop nearly 2 hours away. My hands still trembled as I stepped inside, the harsh fluorescent lights finally grounding me back to reality. I pulled out my phone and tried searching for that gas station, thinking maybe I had stumbled onto some forgotten place. But there was nothing. No listings, no records. According to every map, every local business directory, that gas station didn't exist. I don't know what I stepped into that night. I don't know who or what was in that store. But I do know this. I had been expected. It happened in the fall of 2020 when I was driving alone through a long stretch of highway in West Virginia. It was one of those roads that seemed to go on forever, cutting through endless forests with barely any signs of civilization. I had been driving for hours, my eyes growing heavy, when I saw the glowing blue sign for a rest stop ahead. I debated whether I should just push through and keep going, but exhaustion was creeping up on me fast. I decided to pull in, just for a quick break. The rest stop was nearly empty, just a few vending machines under dim overhead lights and a small, run-down restroom facility. The parking lot was mostly vacant aside from an old pickup truck parked near the entrance. I pulled into a spot, stretching my legs as I stepped out into the cool night air. The place felt abandoned, almost too quiet. No traffic noise, no distant sounds of passing cars, just an overwhelming silence. I walked toward the restroom, the fluorescent lights inside flickering slightly. As I pushed the door open, I immediately felt something off. The air inside was damp, thick with the scent of mildew, like the place hadn't been cleaned in years. The first thing I noticed was the mirror. It was cracked down the middle, streaked with grime, making my own reflection look distorted. The second thing I noticed was the stall door slowly creaking open. I froze. The stall had been closed when I walked in. Now it was open just an inch, revealing nothing but deep shadow inside. The rest of the restroom was empty. No sounds, no other footsteps. But something about that door sent a deep primal chill through me. I forced a laugh at myself, shaking my head, and stepped toward the sink to wash my face. As soon as I turned the faucet on, I heard breathing. Low, ragged, like someone struggling for air. It was faint, but it wasn't mine. I spun around, my pulse slamming against my ribs. The stall door was now fully open. The space inside was still dark, still empty, but the breathing hadn't stopped. I stood there, every instinct in my body screaming at me to leave. I shut the water off and backed toward the exit, trying to keep my steps slow, controlled. The breathing was getting louder now, ragged gasps coming from inside the stall. Then, just as I reached for the door handle, I heard it. A single, wet footstep. I didn't look. I didn't breathe. I yanked the door open and rushed outside, my body surging with panic. The cool night air hit my face, but I didn't stop moving. I headed straight for my car, fumbling for my keys. Then I saw him. A man was standing by the pickup truck, his back to me. His posture was wrong. Too stiff, too still, like he wasn't really there. His head was tilted slightly downward, and though I couldn't see his face, I could tell he was watching me. I felt my stomach twist as I unlocked my car, the beep breaking the silence. The man twitched. A small, jerking movement, like he had been waiting for that sound. I yanked the door open and jumped inside, locking it the second I was in. My hands were shaking as I shoved the key into the ignition. The engine sputtered to life just as I looked up. The man was standing closer. He hadn't moved, not normally. 1 second he had been near the truck, and now he was at the edge of the parking lot, just feet from my car. His head was still tilted down, but now I could see more of his face. Or rather, the lack of one. His skin was pale, almost gray. His mouth was slightly open, but there were no eyes. Just smooth, empty hollows where they should have been. A horrible, wet breath escaped his lips. I slammed the car into reverse, my foot shaking on the pedal. The tires screeched as I backed out of the space, my eyes locked on the thing standing in the lot. It didn't follow. It didn't even react. Just stood there, staring, with nothing. I tore out of the rest stop, speeding down the highway without looking back. My heart was still racing as I checked my mirrors, expecting to see something in my back seat. But there was nothing. Just the dark road ahead. I didn't stop again that night. I didn't care how tired I was. When I finally reached my destination, I pulled into my friend's driveway and just sat there, shaking. The next morning, I checked online, trying to find that rest stop on the map, but I couldn't. There was nothing there. No listings, no mentions, like it had never existed. But I know what I saw, and I know that it saw me too. It happened in the winter of 2016 when I was driving through the back roads of Texas during a long-haul trip. The highways had been too congested, and I figured I could save some time cutting through the smaller roads. It was late, around 2 a.m., and I had barely seen another car for the past hour. Just endless stretches of road cutting through open fields and patches of dense forest. I was running low on gas, and my stomach was starting to remind me that I hadn't eaten since early afternoon. Just as I was beginning to worry, I saw it. A flickering neon sign up ahead that read, Harris Truck Stop. Open 24 hours. It looked like an old roadside diner attached to a gas station, the kind of place that had been around for decades. A couple of semi-trucks were parked on the far side of the lot, their cabs dark, their drivers probably asleep. I pulled in, relieved to have found a place to stop. The gas station looked a little run down, but the diner's lights were on, and through the window, I could see the faint glow of a jukebox in the corner. The whole place had a weird, old-fashioned feel to it, like it had been frozen in time. I parked and stepped out into the cold night air. The place was silent. No crickets, no wind, just an eerie stillness. I told myself I was just tired and walked toward the diner, the bell above the door jingling as I stepped inside. The first thing that hit me was the smell. Not bad, not rotten, just old. Like dust, aged wood, and something faintly metallic. The place looked exactly how you'd imagine a 1950s diner to look. Checkered floors, vinyl booths, and a long counter lined with stools. But something was wrong. The air felt thick, like it was pressing down on me. There were people inside, but they weren't moving. A waitress stood behind the counter, her back to me. A cook was partially visible through the order window, frozen mid-motion as if time had stopped. At the far end of the diner, a man sat alone in a booth, staring at his plate. His hands were resting on the table, unmoving. No one looked at me. No one acknowledged that I had just walked in. I cleared my throat, trying to break the silence. My voice sounded too loud, echoing slightly. The waitress turned slowly, her movements stiff and unnatural. Her eyes were dull, empty, as if she hadn't really seen anything in a long time. Without a word, she grabbed a menu and placed it on the counter in front of me. Her fingers were too long, her nails cracked and uneven. I swallowed hard and sat down, my unease growing by the second. I glanced around again, taking in the details. The people in the diner still hadn't moved. The man in the booth was still staring at his food, his expression blank. The cook hadn't stepped away from the grill. I looked down at the menu, trying to distract myself. The paper was yellowed, brittle, like it had been sitting there for decades. The items listed were bizarre. Things like fresh veal surprise and blood sausage special. I didn't see a single normal option. Then I noticed something even worse. The price at the bottom wasn't in dollars. It was in years. I felt my stomach twist as a cold wave of dread settled over me. I tried to laugh it off, convincing myself it was some weird theme they had going. But as I glanced up, my breath caught in my throat. The waitress was still staring at me. Her mouth twitched, curling into a too wide smile. Her teeth were too small, too sharp. I pushed away from the counter, my instincts screaming at me to leave. But as I turned toward the door, I saw the man in the booth. He was looking at me now. His face was pale, stretched too tight over his bones, his eyes dark hollows. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Just a faint, shuddering breath. I backed away, my heartbeat slamming against my ribs. The silence in the diner was unbearable, like the air itself was holding its breath. Then, without warning, all of them moved at once. The waitress stepped forward. The cook's head snapped up. The man in the booth stood. I ran. I don't remember yanking the door open. I don't remember sprinting across the parking lot. All I remember is the feeling of something behind me, closing in. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as I threw myself inside. As soon as the engine roared to life, I slammed the gas pedal down. My tires screeched against the pavement as I peeled out of the lot, my breath ragged and uneven. I didn't look back. Not until I was miles down the road, my hands still gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles had gone white. Then I saw it. The gas station. The diner. Gone. Nothing but an empty lot overgrown with weeds. No neon sign, no building, no trucks. Like it had never been there at all. I never told anyone. Who would believe me? But sometimes, late at night, I think about those people inside, if they were ever people at all. And the worst part? I keep having this horrible feeling that I was never supposed to leave. Pit stops are meant to be safe. A quick break, a place to refuel, a moment to rest. But sometimes, they aren't what they seem. A gas station that shouldn't exist. A rest stop that watches you. A diner that was never there. If these stories made you think twice about pulling over at night, like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying true horror stories. And don't forget to hit the bell icon, because the next time you stop, something might be waiting. Stay safe and keep driving.